And welcome back. Our final presenter for Disruptive Diner Cloudsourcing is John Toenjes, and John has joined us from Champaign, where he's at the University of Illinois. I got the privilege of seeing a performance that John worked together with some folks all over the world to choreograph. Not necessarily that you did the choreography. Did you do the choreography?
Well, I structured the choreography.
Right.
That's how we call it.
So, but I meant choreograph as in bring together all of these disparate people. So,
Right.
Developers and designers and musicians and performers and people that worked on the framework for the choreography at each site.
I think of myself as a visionary producer.
Right. And not in the smarmy sense of the word producer, right?
No smarm at all.
But so John is doing some really interesting things. You may not be aware that University of Illinois has long had a center of supercomputing. It's been very early on, was instrumental in the backbone of the internet. And they do some really fantastic things with performance and how people relate to each other using media. And John is in the Department of Dance, and he's going to talk to us about his experience with what happens when you start having these tools that allow people to collaborate either in the space they're in or across long distances, and what collaboration looks like. And I think this is a great way and a really inspiring way to close this out, because we've been seeing all these things about potential and how people are doing things, and now through the arts we're going to get a peek into the future a little bit about some things that might be possible coming forward. And and to be fair, some of that's pretty bleeding edge, so it's not to say that this is all ready for prime time. Right. You're exploring some really interesting territory, which to me is like a really low-risk R&D department. So,
Yeah, right.
compared to if you were doing this at Cisco.
Exactly.
So, are you ready?
I'm ready, sure.
All right.
You have your 20-second
Yes.
autoplay thing going?
Let me just make sure. Yes.
Okay.
And John Toenjes.
Thank you. Today I'm going to touch on 4 recent performances. Timings and View Profile are multi-located dances over the internet. Kama Bagata Neolum and Astral Convertible Reimagined were staged with locally distributed network dependencies. All 4 use distributed collaborations and data transfer to explore the human ramifications of and possibilities inherent in modern modes of communication. Internet communication and data distribution expand our reach and connectivity through electronic means. What does this mean for our humanity, both individually and collectively? How does this affect us as a global village? So the big topics for me relating to humanity in this work are: how is my presence felt or perceived? How is my identity transformed and reconstructed? Where is the location of the performance? Where am I at any one time? And community: who is looking at me and interpreting my message? Collaborative works using internet communication and data transfer tools are a way of grappling with the changing world on a subconscious level. This is of core concern to us now. Just last week, a student responded to my latest work saying, "Electricity is the difference between silence and laughter, loneliness and interaction. When I'm with my electricity, I never feel lonely at all." View Profile was a multi-located performance focusing on presence and identity. For identity to be transmitted via the internet, it must be captured and demolished, removed from the physical and thrust into the media sea, then reconstituted at another place. This gives rise to the phenomenon of what I call mediated presence. If you Google yourself, you may find you have multiple identities constructed by unknown others. We created false Facebook identities as characters in this piece who were friended by audience and internet onlookers. Their identity was constructed as the piece went along. These characters actually still exist. Each dancer created a signature move, I'm going to dance now, that was shown to a remote character named Z, who emulated and transformed it. When Z then danced it had become powerful media and represented the online world that takes what we feed the media sea and makes of it what it will and then propagates it like an internet meme. 2 musicians at SARC in Belfast, the Sonic Arts Research Center, had online meetings with us to plan the performance and rehearse. The Irish musicians performed live in 4-channel CD quality sound direct from Belfast, accompanying the dance with leitmotifs they had developed for each character. Timings is a performance The internet affords multimodal communication over long distances in more or less real time. But latency can cause timing problems, which is usually seen as a drawback. But in timings, I use latency metaphorically to represent the vital role that timing plays in our lives by layering multiple data representations of the same movement gesture at different latency rates. I asked, how do we respond to multiple occurrences of the same gesture arriving sequentially? Dancers developed specific personae and accompanying gestures with psycho-emotional meaning, which were then made into dance loops that were captured with custom 3D positional tracking and looping software, as well as with a 2D video camera. Various media types representing the same gestures were then transmitted to our internet partners at NIU in Illinois and to Japanese Butoh dancers in Tokyo. These media types travel with more or less latency. We were also able to take advantage of the great distance to Tokyo for maximum latency effect. These media types arrived at remote locations one after the other. Musical representation was created out of gestural data in real time. Live video streaming transmitted the same gestures at a different time. Positional data controlled avatars, which you can see in the background there, performed the same gestures with even more latency. And recorded video was to come at even a later time. The dancers responded to the layered incoming data according to their persona. If I respond to a gesture once, then see it again in a different form, do I respond differently, having experienced it once or twice before? How does latency-based layering affect the meaning of what is seen? Do cultural differences affect how we perceive gesture? This slide shows my latest piece called Kama Bagata Neelam, which used local networking to link the dancers and the audience together in community. The premise was that even though because of our attraction to personal devices, we're losing togetherness that comes from the personal touch, internet connectivity allows us to grow community on a larger scale, albeit a little differently with electricity. What happens is this giant iPad man comes down and delivers the flashy devices of our desire to the community below. And we developed custom software to control the dancers' iPads. And this let us join these dancers together to display graphics sequentially at the same time or in any combination at all. We also created a smartphone app to link the audience to the dancers in community as well. Audience members with smartphones were able to see this extra material that those who didn't have smartphones couldn't. But what's interesting about that is that the audience shared these phones and actually became members of a community together. It was a very interesting offshoot of that. At the end, the dancers appear to become their devices, or at least see the world solely through them. The networking is complete. We are disembodied yet connected through the internet. Is this our future? Astral Convertible Reimagined was a restaging of one of the very first interactive dances. The original set pieces responded roughly to the proximity of individual dancers by producing sound and light. In my reimagining, I used micro-wireless technology and the ideas of Web 2.0 to make the set pieces one unified unit depending upon the joint actions of the community of dancers for their interactivity. So these wireless accelerometers were sewn into the costumes and reported their position and direction to the central computer. Machine learning algorithms interpreted the accumulated data in terms of community. Is this a harmonious group? Is there one rebel in the crowd? Is the group disorganized? Harmonious groupings created harmonious sounds, whereas disjunct or more complicated arrangements elicited more nuanced musical responses. The lights and sound-making apparatus formed their own wireless network and acted in conjunction with each other to create an overall look on the stage. So I hope that this look at these performances has somehow sort of given you a glimpse of how network collaboration can really be used to advance dance and theater and grapple with the problems of the 21st century.
Fantastic, John. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you. That
So,
goes fast.
20 seconds each goes fast, and you covered a lot of territory with some pretty amazing images. Everybody's presentations will be posted to Openly Disruptive site later today so that you can take a look at them. John, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things, and I've had a couple of questions that have come in also. When you see, so you've got a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
What are the things that the audience, the audience of 2013 or 2014 really picks up on that are going on, and what are the things that they're maybe not even aware of our going on. So like when I saw timings, you know, people were like, oh, this is amazing, all these things going on. And it took, you know, my observation was it took some people in the audience a little while to figure out that the avatars were motion capture of dancers that were then, you know, taking on a life, you know, that it was becoming generative, that they were taking on a life of their own. So what are the things that people pick up on easily, and what are the things that they're not maybe even noticing yet?
I have a lot of discussions with people about the format of my theater. I tend to overload things. I tend to just put a million things out there for people to look at. And a lot of audience members want to have their focus directed. You know, they expect to come in. I think there's a couple things going on here. I think there's an expectation when we go to a theater that everything will be, your attention will be directed to what it is one person wants you to see. I take a more sort of a approach that you're coming into this theater and I'm bringing the world into this theater. And as you know, as we go through our lives, there's all these millions, like even in this room, there's a video camera, there's people eating their lunch, there's you with your, and there's this projector, and then there's my feeling of how I did. And so there's a lot of things, and I choose which one to focus on. So I, in a sense, like to present what I call a multi-focus experience. And it's up to you to decide which one you want to look at any one time. Now, I have a lot of people that really don't like that. They come into the theater and they feel really frustrated. They're like, what am I supposed to look at? What am I supposed to look at? And I say, well, you decide. So, I don't know, I go back and forth on that. I think it's an attitude also that has to do with, I'm thinking that generationally, as we get more and more into a younger generation that's used to looking at the world through their cell phone apps and stuff, and always kind of multitasking, that question might go away a little.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. What about, what do you think, sorry, let me rephrase this. So what do you think about the role, you know, how much role is the music playing in this? How much is it the visuals? You know, because if I'm seeing it at a distributed, you know, if I'm seeing it someplace else,
right?
You know, what is the role of all of those things? Is it, are they, you know, are they creating a construct that is they get the whole thing, or are they really having an audio experience?
Well, see, that's when in one slide I talked about location. Where is the performance? Because with internet distributed performances, there are, for example, that view profile, view profile, where we had an audience and we had musicians in Belfast, and then in Illinois we had an audience and a bunch of performers in one dance studio, and we also had another performer in another studio with yet another audience. So we had 3 audiences, live audiences, in 3 separate physical locations, and plus we had an internet audience who were logging in and making the Facebook identity come alive and watching the dance. And they also were giving actually suggestions for us for things to do. So it's really an interesting question about where the performance is and what you're trying to present to these various audiences. What do these audiences see? Of course, with video cameras, you have a very limited point of view. So it's an interesting question, and I don't really know exactly any specific answer to it, but it's an interesting thing to contemplate. Like, what are you seeing in the video camera? What are you not seeing? On the internet, actually, in that performance, you know, we had the video camera. We also had a chat window where people could chat. We had this window where people could log into Facebook, and so for the internet audience member, there was sort of a really multimodal kind of experience. For the people sitting in the room, well, of course, at Illinois, I had tons of screens and stuff going on. That's just because of me. But in Ireland, they had just a screen and dancers. So anyway, I don't know if I answered the question, but
no, you did. Yeah, you kind of get to you're playing with it. You don't know.
Right. Yeah.
The question just came in. Did you use multiple transmission routes to intentionally create latency, or did that just emerge on its own? I think they're talking specifically about timings.
Yeah. Not really. The internet is a mysterious being, how things get from place to place. You can do a thing called a trace route that lets you see what router has handled what data. But you never really know unless you're working just on a specific node. Like I could go from Champaign to Chicago and have a direct line and know that I'm going to go through these various routers to that place. But when I send a transmission out to Japan, I really have no idea where it's going to go.
And that stream could change over time, too.
Yeah, and so actually it does change second by second or millisecond by millisecond. Routers are constantly monitoring the kind of the amount of flow they can put out. So if it finds that the data is not going very well on this wire, it will automatically switch it over and go over to this place. So it's just kind of a general idea that if I'm shooting video, if I have high-def video, it's going to take a lot longer for all that stuff to go through as opposed to a MIDI signal, which can be very small. So,
right.
Yeah.
We're running a little bit long on time. I want to close with one final question. You know, there's a lot of things we talked when we were off camera that there are areas like telemedicine and education and places where this idea of really having telepresence or this ability to, you know, to be present to each other at long distances and to be able to collaborate is becoming a real, you know, it's a business imperative, you know. Do you have any sense from what you're doing, like, do you think that the state of the technology is really close to that? Just speculate a little bit on, you know, if you were to really replicate this experience of being in the room, how far away are we from that, and what are the things, you know, from what you're seeing, because you're really exploring, you know, kind of the nature of live versus mediated communication.
Right.
So just give us a little bit of speculation on where you think that's going.
Well, it's generally networks are getting bigger, faster, et cetera. And people are playing around. There are other things with presence, actually. It's interesting to think, like, what is the presence? If my face is on that screen, am I really present? I might be more present than somebody who's in the room who's not paying attention to me, right? So that idea of presence is something that I play around with. So I think important is you do have to worry about latency. It's certainly an idea. How much people are paying attention, how much people are able to see. In our work at dance, it's really interesting. A lot of people I know have given up on this kind of work because they feel that if I'm dancing with a partner here and then I turn around, suddenly that person isn't there anymore. Whereas if you're there and I turn around, I can still kind of feel your presence in a sense. So I think the more multimodal, I like this word multimodal, the more of that stuff you bring in, the more present somebody feels. So if you have audio, if you have scratch and sniff even would be really nice. I don't know, whatever.
It reminds me of I have a friend that introduced me to somebody with macular degeneration. We talked about how, as they go blind, one of the things that they learned was that our human retina has only like a 2 megapixel resolution.
Oh.
And the way that we see reality that seems like this really incredibly rich IMAX thing in 3D and everything is actually a construct that our brain is constantly scanning and assembling this whole thing together. So reality is all here.
Right.
And it'll be interesting, you know, based on what you're saying, is it may not, there's probably some interesting line with, doesn't matter how much better the screen is, if the other cues aren't there, you're never going to believe, that's never going to give you a sense of presence. So maybe part of it is to give some, you know, if we are sensing flex, you know, the floor flexing or whatever it is that lets me know there's a dancer behind me, that those things are far more important than just having a better screen.
Yeah, probably. And I think the idea of surround peripheral vision is huge.
Right.
And that's what you don't get with a computer screen.
Right.
It ends, and so you don't construct a complete picture. It's just part of a picture.
Right, but even if you're in an IMAX theater and you get all that peripheral stuff, you're still not buying that you're completely there. I mean, it's a better illusion.
It's better though.
It's a better illusion, but you don't ever really lose the awareness of where you are.
Right, and that's why they put those booty shaker speakers down there and stuff, you know, just the more you
And I think we're going to close on the note of booty shakers. What a great way to wrap up the Disruptive Diner. Thanks a lot for being with us. We'll be back in March, the third Tuesday of every month, noon to 1, free to members and in communities around the country. Next month, we're going to be talking surprisingly open, so how some open standards and some open shared content, building on some of the stuff that Kyle talked about today, is really creating some interesting opportunities that didn't exist before. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us.
All right.